Good morning, scholars. Happy Friday. Welcome to the new vocabulary section of today's lesson. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be doing it a little differently. I'm not going to have the screen split in half. Instead, I'm just going to write it out for you guys. So today's first new word is black codes. And the black codes were, let me switch to a different color. They were laws passed in the South to limit the rights of African Americans. So if you guys remember from our slavery unit, the South had similar things called slave codes. And so these are going to be very similar in that both the slave codes and the black codes were created to limit the rights of African Americans. Slave codes were to limit the rights of slaves. Black codes were to limit the rights of freed African Americans. So these are going to be, let's actually change the color so we can be a little different here. So black codes are going to be very anti for African Americans. And today's lessons will be about how it was how it was not good for African Americans. Okay, let me erase, and then we will move on to our second word. If I went too fast, y'all can just pause or rewind the video as many times as you'd like. Okay, our second word is segregation. So I'm sure you guys have heard this word a lot, so let's define it. Segregation is separating people based on race. So if you guys remember seeing videos of the civil rights movement, oftentimes let's say that there is a restaurant. Let's see. This is my restaurant. Let's say this is the normal entrance. This is restaurant. This will be the white entrance. So these are an example of how things were segregated. This would be a white people only. And let's see. So typically the white people only sections of anything would be really, really fancy. So they'll have some nice fancy lights. It'll be very clean. It'll be well taken care of. And then we'll have here kind of like a really dingy, not so good looking side entrance here. And then under segregation, this would be the colored entrance, where you would go to pick up your food. You couldn't even like sit down to eat in the restaurant because the restaurant on the inside was whites only sometimes. So this is an example of segregation, separating people, white people only here, colored entrance only here, based on race. Cool. So let us erase and then move on to our final word. Okay. Okay, so our final word is the Freedmen's Bureau. So a bureau is like an organizer, and freedmen are freed African Americans. So this is a group that's meant to organize and help freed African Americans. Let's write that definition down right here. An organization that provided support for freed men in the South, such as food, housing, medical care, and schools. So, under black codes, African Americans were not allowed to be educated in a formal sense. So the Freedmen's Bureau saw that as an injustice and made it part of their programming. Same with food, housing, medical care. Because things are segregated, the quality of things that are given to African Americans for housing, for food, for medicine is going to be of a lower or worse quality than those given to white people. And that's because since they are now freed and not slaves, and they are under the eyes of the law equal citizens, they have to be given these things that white people are given to, but nothing said about the quality of those things being given. So it was up to the Freedmen's Bureau to make sure that African Americans were taken care of in a really well sense, not taken care of in the way that the South wanted them to be taken care of. All right, if you guys continue to have questions about the words, feel free to chat me on Google Hangouts or send me an email. If not, go ahead and move on to the next section of today's lesson. See y'all.